From January 6th to January 7th, housing inventory dropped by 2/3. Now we got 6,000 lots that are available. There are burnouts, many of which are on the market now to sell. Total damage and economic loss estimates are, in the 250 to 275 billion dollars. Palisades on the market, 173 active listings, 13 under contract, 12 pending, and 43 have sold. So the properties that have sold, it's interesting. I actually did a deep dive into who's buying these lots.
Episode 50 of Market Moves with Mark and Jeff. Two uninteresting guys talking about interesting times with a twist again, Jeff. I think we've found the winning formula is to bring someone interesting along here with us. And we will be doing that here again in this episode. And I'm really excited for this guest. We've got a lot of aspiring real estate professionals and specifically appraisers, those that are getting into it and maybe those that are just starting out. And our guest, Charles Baker, SRA, AIRRS, a couple of Appraisal Institute designations after his name, is joining us today. And he's got a really interesting story of how he came into appraisal, but he happens to live and work within the Palisade fires. And what an interesting real estate situation and environment we have there. And we thought we'd bat that around. Charles, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much, Mark and Jeff. So it's such a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate you doing this. So looking forward to this interview.
Boy, it's a lot of fun to have you here, Charles. And Mark really wasn't kidding when he talked about us bringing in somebody interesting to kind of augment our lack of interest, or at least how interesting we are personally. Yeah, and in fact, as we were just getting ready to start this, I think you were talking a little bit about how you got into the profession. Was a bit of an interesting story. Would love to hear a little of your background as to how you made it into this crazy real estate appraisal space.
Sure. Well, it was really by happenstance. I went to college for a couple of years, and I decided to get into the music business in Southern California. I started at the age of 19. I was performing in a couple of groups in LA, trying to get, grind out a record deal. I was working. I had a day job, of course. My job was at a 1-hour photo lab. I don't know if you remember those, but that's where you brought your film in, you dropped it off. And I was the guy running the printing machine and running the dropping the film in the developing machine. And we used to have, I saw all kinds of stuff that was some of it was unmentionable, but I saw a lot of real estate photos coming through. And I got to know a few appraisers. We had accounts with Great Western Bank, First Interstate Bank at the time, and some independent appraisal companies that would bring their film in. And I started to just befriend them, and I talked to them about what they did. And it really intrigued me. I had grown up in some interesting homes. My parents built both of the homes that our family grew up in. So I really took a keen interest in architecture and real estate. And I thought maybe this could be something that I could do. I knew nothing about the business. Well, it turns out there was a gentleman who was getting out of the appraisal business, moving on, and we engaged in a buy-sell agreement. I actually bought his business, took a couple of classes. And in 1988, I was officially in business. I hung my shingle and I took over his client base and just learned the rope and had some more mentors along the way, took more classes. I joined the Society of Real Estate Appraisers in 1990 as a candidate member. So that was my transition. It was sort of a trial by fire, but it turns out that I just loved the business and I loved problem solving and learning about architecture and neighborhoods, all that sort of thing. And turns out I really had an aptitude for it. So I was fortunate. That's how I got my start, though. And here we are, how many years later? 35, 36 years later. You couldn't have written the script any differently.
So Charles, I want to get this straight. So first, to some of our listeners who are just getting in, I'm sure Jeff was part of this. I was too. That you would take photos with the digital camera. Well, not at digital, before the digital camera, and you would take your film in to Walgreens or wherever and get it developed, and then glue stick it onto a report. That was how it went in 80s and 90s. And so you went, Charles, from developing unmentionable images in a store to appraising the Playboy Mansion. Do I have this right? This is really full circle here.
Yes, it's very full circle. That is correct. Yeah, an assignment came in for a property address that I was pretty familiar with, and I thought, okay, this will be very interesting. And of course, touring the Playboy Mansion, which was what it was known at the time when Hugh Hefner was still alive. In fact, he was there at the house, but he was wheelchair bound. I didn't actually meet the gentleman, but I met his staff, and we toured the house. It's a whole backstory with the house. It was designed by a famous architect that slips my mind at the moment, but it was designed for the founder of the Broadway department store chain, well before the Hefner empire took it over. So it's just an incredible piece of property, probably the keystone property in all of Holmby Hills, Los Angeles. I had to be very careful about taking pictures inside because there were still photographs of playmates all over the place, and I had to be very, very judicious about where I focused the camera. But it was a really interesting assignment. The house was a little worse for wear. It needed some work. It ended up selling, and the gentleman that bought it owns the property next door, and he's doing just a major, major renovation of the property now. It's a whole nother story. But that was a fascinating assignment, and I've had a number of assignments that just really, you just go, wow, when you walk into these properties. What I have to do is just sort of put the emotion aside, remember that I'm here to do a job. But you can't help but think about the history and the legacy of some of these properties that I've had the fortune of being able to appraise.
It's such a unique way to explore an interesting property. Like almost no one in the world gets access to any of these properties that we get to walk through, because you gotta inspect every nook and cranny. And if you were somehow it came through that you would visit the Playboy Mansion, you're going to a couple of the common areas and the pool or whatever it is, and then leaving, right, and not getting to see the entirety of it. So what a cool experience.
It was great. No, the architectural experience that I have is just amazing. I've appraised 3 of the most famous green and green homes in Pasadena: the Blacker House, the Culbert's House, and the Robinson House. Each of those is an exquisite work of art from an architectural perspective. Homes by Frank Lloyd Wright Jr., Wallace Neff, Sylvanus Marston, Garrett Van Pelt, Myron Hunt, Elmer Gray, Ricardo Legaretto, just on and on and on. We really have just a fascinating architectural library to choose from here in Southern California. So I've been really fortunate in that regard.
Jeff, I got one more question, and I happen to know this. I've at least been acquainted with Charles for more than a decade, and remember hadn't had a chance to talk to you about it, Charles, but I think you're the only person that I know that has attended some of the major Tony Robbins events. And I just wondered if you might share some of that experience, your observations, what you learned.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you for asking about that. And, anyone that has an opportunity to see Tony Robbins live, go to one of his seminars. I couldn't recommend it enough. This is not a commercial, but it changed my life. I went through a divorce in 2017. In 2018, I was elected to the board of directors of our Southern California chapter of the Appraisal Institute. And in 2018, I was assuming the role of president of the chapter. So going through divorce, serving as president of the chapter, I was also LDAC discussion leader. I was chair of our government relations committee meeting in Sacramento. I was going to be speaking at all of our chapter developed events, and I was going through divorce. So what's a guy to do? And I decided to go all in on the self-improvement track, and I've been wanting to see him for years. He had an event in San Jose, California in March of 2018. So I just went all in, got the best seats I could, and it was an absolute life-changing event. We walked on hot coals. We learned about the triad. We learned about the 6 human needs. We learned about digging deep and trying to get all of those demons out of our system, look at life in a different way, how to get into state in an instant. One of his other speakers, Joseph McClendon, is incredible. He's out there doing these events with Tony, so I just can't recommend it enough. That was my first one. Then I did Date with Destiny in Florida. That's a 6-day event. Leadership Academy in San Diego. That was a 5-day event. And then I went to Fiji for Life Wealth Mastery. And that's at Tony Robbins' island there that he owns. That was amazing. I met people from all over the world, a lot of folks from Australia, from Tasmania. Met some folks from Brazil, Argentina, as well as a lot of folks from the UK and some folks from America. It was just really, really life affirming. And I've taken that served as a launch pad for me for my career from that point forward. So I can't recommend it enough. And I appreciate you asking about that. It means a lot.
Well, I'm glad Mark had that kind of behind the scenes knowledge there, Charles. It's just so fascinating. We tend to have, fit into a bucket or a certain label. I'm an appraiser. I'm a, name whatever the profession is. And yet we all have this human background and story and history and things that we've experienced, that just lead us to who we are and what we are today. And what we are today will be different than what we are tomorrow, hopefully as well. But yeah, I've listened to some interviews that Tony's done on different podcasts and with different groups or whatever. And I just, hearing your account of the experience, and not just the experience, but the impact that it had on your life really does, kind of further whet my appetite to dive a little deeper into that. Not only that, but it underscores the way that we led this podcast out, that we really are good at finding people that are interesting, at least to come on and talk to augment me and Mark. Mark and I both have a similar story of, we got into the appraisal profession not thinking we were going to, but our dads were in it and we found our way there at some point. Yours was quite different. I'll just tell this real briefly. My dad was on track to do a similar path that you did, Charles, of buying out an existing appraiser's practice. Sets up a meeting to work out the details, and the guy doesn't show up. And my dad's like, well, dang, that's a bummer. Later discovered that the guy ended up getting shot that day. And, it was this tragic event. And so eventually he's like, well, I guess I can just hang my own shingle and, figure this out as I go. But the tutelage and the mentorship, would have been valuable if he was pursuing that same path. So right. I'm glad that you're the person you bought the practice from at least showed up on day one for you.
He showed up, yes. He met an untimely demise, though, about 3 years later. He was playing tennis and was injured. It somehow led to a blood infection, and the gentleman passed away. It was really very odd. But anyway, I'm going to leave you with one takeaway from Tony Robbins. It's all about getting into a peak state. How do you do that? Well, what do you focus on? Okay, you can choose to focus on the negative, on the the news that just we're bombarded with every day, 90% of which is negative, or you can choose to focus on all of the untold stories of positivity, of how people are helping other people. You look at a situation not from what the problem of the situation, but you look at every problem as an opportunity. So focus is number one. Number two is language. What sort of language do you use to describe what it is that you're facing? Maybe you're facing a challenge or a problem. Well, how do you reframe that? Maybe you look at it again as an opportunity and use opportune language to describe what you're dealing with. And you're programming your brain as you speak about it in your own mind and to others. The third thing, and I'll leave you with this, is physicality. What do you do with your body? Movement is key to circulation and getting the blood flowing in your brain, and it just makes you feel good. So if you use your body in a way to communicate emphasis and positivity, just movement is so important. And that can change how you feel and how you approach and how you look at every situation, every problem that comes before you. And honestly, this experience with the Tony Robbins workshops has literally changed me, I think, at the cellular level. I can get into that peak state in an instant just by doing a certain move. And it has come in very handy, especially if I'm getting up on a stage and I'm speaking in front of a bunch of people. I just tell myself, I'm here to serve. I'm here to serve. I'm here to help these people. I'm here to communicate to them. And just that sort of neuro-linguistic programming has had such a positive effect on my life and my career, and hopefully on other people that I've been able to communicate and talk with over the years. So Long answer.
Charles, that's I think fascinating. And as I'm listening to you talk, I think I immediately think about that as it relates to a common topic on our podcast, which is where is the world going as it relates to real estate professionals? You got all this threat that's out there, that gives you 100 reasons a day to just sort of throw your hands up and say, what's the use? This is all going away anyway. But then there are folks out there that are not focused on that and are putting head down and growing and expanding where they can. And I think I've mentioned it 4 or 5 times, but I'm fascinated by the shortage of electricians, one of the most analog positions that you could think. But there is now AI is bringing out a shortage of electricians. Who would have thought? And if you had just thrown your hands up, you wouldn't be taking advantage of that scenario.
Right. I think appraisers, it's a pretty isolated, singular profession for a lot of folks. And so that the negative feedback can sort of multiply in your mind if you allow it to happen. Or you can look for opportunities. You can look for solutions. You can offer your services to maybe another cohort that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. And I'll give you a good example. For years, I was doing bank work. I was doing mortgage lender work. And I was very successful at it in Southern California. I was doing some of the most, expensive, high value properties around. But as interest rates went higher, I've had a 10-year transition away from that and into litigation work. So I'm doing 90% of my work now is court work, expert witness work. I enjoy it a lot. We're solving problems. We're helping the legal community come to some consensus on valuation-related issues, and I don't know, it just resonates with me really, really well. And that same approach that I apply to solving problems, I'm using that in my litigation practice. So there you go.
That makes so much sense, and I think your outlook and just mindset really resonates with me, and I'm sure with Mark, Charles. It's kind of this growth mindset, right? And hearing you describe, what got you into the profession, the way you approach, prepping and getting to a place where you can stand on the witness stand, sometimes in a hostile environment, and calmly answer questions. That's not a comfortable place for a lot of people to be,
No.
but to be able to build to that is a reflection of, clearly the experiences you've had with, Tony Robbins and this growth opportunity. One of the company values we intentionally selected within our firm that we have is growth, and with kind of the sub moniker being, we view challenges as an opportunity. And it's, if nothing else, you're at least confirming that we may be on the right track there. But there's just, it's so easy, like you said, to be isolated as an individual practitioner, as an appraiser, and kind of fall into this negativity that's out there on social media around the space and where the profession might be going, and AVMs and artificial intelligence and everything's going to take over the world and put us out of business. Maybe that ends up playing out in the long run, but it hasn't to this point. And I feel like we really do control our destiny, whether we're willing to adopt and grow and adapt to what the market demands from us, or we're not, you know what I mean? And so it's, we're at least of a similar mindset, I think, with our outlook on the profession.
100%. You cannot stop change. Change will happen whether you are on board with it or not. So the key is to find out how you can expand your mind to try to understand the direction of where change is going, and then hop on board and offer your skill set in that new environment. There's nothing we can do about the change. It's going to happen. It's a process of creative destruction. Is happening all the time. Old ways are fading away. New ways are taking over. We have to be able to adapt. But we also have this wonderful body of legacy knowledge that we can bring to the table that maybe, there's a difference between information, knowledge, and wisdom. And what folks that have been in the business for a while can bring is maybe an element of some wisdom here. Like, maybe we don't want to do that. Maybe we want to do this instead. So I recommend everyone, when they reach a certain age, they need to write their memoirs. They need to write down their life story, because everyone's life is interesting in one aspect or another, or maybe their entire arc of their life can be a fascinating expose for someone else to be able to learn from. And my mother wrote her memoirs a number of years ago, and I remember reading her account of when she was raising her children from her perspective, not from mine. It was fascinating, and it was such a gift. So, I digress, but I just think everyone has a gift to be able to offer to this profession and to those in their orbit. It's a duty. We owe it to the next generation.
Boy, I couldn't agree more. And I think, in this 5-second shorts clip world, all that most people see these days are the best moments, and that isn't life. And so I think people feel like they're independently struggling or failing when they have the troughs, but that is just life. And I think memoirs tend to cover that sort of strife well when it's not really covered today.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, let's jump in. Well, let's not jump into the fires. That's not really a good a good intro there.
Languaging.
The languaging, yeah. We'll work on this. So I think we probably could do a part 2 carrying on this discussion that we've started in the first 20 minutes of this podcast. Yeah. It's really interesting, but we did want to spend and save a little time to talk about your boots on the ground experience of the Palisade fires that sort of captured the news and sort of world international attention. And obviously you are still living, and those in and around the area are still living with the ramifications of and the rebuild and the cleanups. And, for those that don't remember, because this is some time ago now, we had my notes are showing, Charles, some 6,800 structures damaged, 3,600 single family homes, like $30 billion of damage. Any of that ringing a bell, or is that vastly underestimated?
Yeah, so I developed a 2-hour Zoom presentation at the request of our chapter president. I gave it in March in front of a Zoom audience of 250 people. I've offered that presentation in various forms on 3 different occasions after that. The most recent was for the counselors of real estate, and we had participants on that call from basically all over the world. It was really interesting. Yeah, there were 2 main fire events, of course, Palisades and Altadena. And then we had another fire event that sort of spread down into Malibu. It took out a lot of beachfront properties in Malibu. But the stats are just, unbelievable. And there's really no way to dance around this. It was just an absolute tragedy. 23,700 acres altogether. That's in the Palisades area. Pre-fire, there were about 9,400 structures. 6,380 structures were destroyed, or about 68% of all of the inventory in the Palisades are gone. So when you think about it, from January 6th to January 7th, housing inventory dropped by 2/3. Lot inventory increased by, if you take, there's maybe a handful of lots pre-fire, and now we got 6,000 lots that are available. There are burnouts, many of which are on the market now to sell. In the Eaton fire, 14,000 acres were burned, about 15,000 structures pre-fire, 7,000 structures post-fire, or about 45% of the inventory was destroyed in Altadena. Insured losses up to $35 billion. Total damage and economic loss estimates are, in the $250 to $275 billion. That includes real property, of course, property tax assessment, businesses, goodwill value, rent loss, payroll taxes, public infrastructure losses, ground leases, so on and so on and so on and so on. And I've done some deep studies into the diminution of value factor on vacant land, as well as properties that survived the fires. And I probably have about 20 assignments there now that I'm working on. Most of these are casualty loss assignments, where people are they want to know what the value is pre-fire and then what the value is today, whether it's a house that survived or a house that was destroyed, and they're left with land value. So that spread is going to be their tax write-off. Some folks have had good insurance, other folks did not. And what I'm finding is the folks that just were terribly underinsured, those are the properties that are more than likely hitting the market for sale. And we have folks that are they're kind of done. They can't stomach the thought of a 5, 6, 7 year rebuild process with getting all of the neighborhood amenities back into place. They're out. Other folks, and I know several of them, are sticking it out. They actually are in the permitting stage. They're involved in the community in the rebuilding effort, community wide. They are offering blueprints and plans for a number of different types and styles of homes, and we're going to see a real. We're going to see some real movement in that regard once the community is able to get together, and that's already happening. And we can talk about that ad nauseum, but I think it's interesting. A good friend of mine who is a real estate developer lived in Palisades, Artie Tavengarian. He lost his primary residence. He lost a rental property. His son-in-law lost a house, and a house that he built on San Onofre in the Palisades, which sits right above Tom Hanks' house. It was called the Succession House. It was featured in a Netflix series called Succession, I believe. It sold in, I think it was 2021 for $83 million. I appraised it 3 times during the construction phase and spent a lot of time there with Artie. It was bought by a tech billionaire, and that house was lost in the fire. Just a tragedy. There's no way to spin that, I'm telling you, because it was just an incredible work of art. Could it be reconstituted? Yes, but it would be an 8 to 10 year process. So it's a pretty emotional experience driving around the streets of the Palisades. I had friends who grew up there. I spent a lot of time there, and just to see the utter devastation. But what are you going to do? I mean, the Palisades sits up against the Santa Monica Mountains. The Altadena sits up against the San Gabriel Mountains. That's the watershed and the fire shed that it has burned repeatedly and regularly for hundreds, if not thousands of years. In fact, the Chumash and the Tongva Indians that occupied the lowlands of the Santa Monica Mountains over in the Palisades area, they would set backfires because they were ravaged by fire as well. Of course, Europeans didn't live there at the time, but what we did is when we settled those neighborhoods, we brought in eucalyptus trees and palm trees, and those just go up like kindling. The oak trees don't, and the Native Americans cultivated oak trees in these canyons, and they cleared out the brush. So we've sort of forgotten the lessons that they learned. And I think we need to relearn those lessons, because we are not going to abandon these foothill communities. We're going to resettle, we're going to rebuild, reconstitute these neighborhoods. They're beautiful. And who knows, in another 100 years, there may be another devastating fire, but we have to rebuild and to try to mitigate future fires. But it will happen again, honestly.
Well, the devastation certainly captures, the world's attention when this sort of thing is happening. But it is like unequivocally one of the most beautiful places in the country, if not the world, for sure. And I don't know how it couldn't be rebuilt in time. It's just a question of how. And there's so many dynamics in doing that. In emotion, I'm sure, is part of it. I live in Houston, and we have a different type of natural disaster that we deal with a lot, which is the flooding and the devastation and the war zone that it feels like. I can certainly relate to that visceral, driving down streets shortly after the water recedes, and the hopelessness and the amount of work ahead to figure out what next.
Yeah. It can be overwhelming, but just got to pick yourself up and just tackle one step at a time. And as you get through each of those initial steps, it sort of feeds on itself. You reward yourself for each step that you've accomplished, and then you move on to the next one, then the next, and the next. And eventually, you work through the problem, and you come out on the other side of it with reconstituted community. But it's going to take a lot of time. Fortunately, there's a tremendous brain trust that is at work in the Palisades and in Altadena. In Altadena specifically, there's a company that is offering floor plans, homes with all of the construction details, materials lists, costs, ready to go off the shelf. Here you go. Here's plan 104, or whatever. And they're beautiful homes. So I have a feeling that we're going to see that, that process play out in a really good way.
We've that was and I think some dynamics are there too. When Hurricane Harvey, we had a dam release that was intentional because the dam was in trouble, but it sort of intentionally flooded a lot of the high end homes in and around the bayous of Houston, and so but you had quite a brain trust there that were handed this problem, because you got a lot of wealthy folks that have found a lot of success and have a lot of means, I guess, to solve some of these problems. So it was unique in that way because that's not always how it happens. And I imagine there's dynamics there in California too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, Charles, there's so many areas to jump into. One of the first that comes to my mind is related to insurance. Jeff and I, even on this podcast early on, had covered kind of this phenomenon that insurance was sort of hard to hold, I think, was going through a transition period, it seems. And I wondered if that's the reality of what was there, but that we had maybe caps on what insurance companies could provide or charge, I think. And that some were sort of in transition trying to figure out what to do at these exact moments as the fires were coming through. But I just the state of the insurance situation as it relates to real estate and specifically the fire affected areas.
Well, yeah, I am not an expert in this regard, but I've done a lot of research. In California, we have what's called the FAIR Plan, which is it's a plan that essentially all of the admitted carriers in California, like the State Farms, the Farmers, the Lloyds, they have to participate in this FAIR Plan, which is a collective, I don't know, it's a nonprofit collective of insurance companies that they all contribute to this fund. And that fund is used to pay out sort of like a fund of last resort. The FAIR Plan policy is very limited in scope. It basically pays for fire damage and a few other items, but it's very limited. I believe it's hail and wind. Fire is the big component of the FAIR Plan. And then once you have your FAIR Plan policy in place, you need to get a difference in conditions policy from a private carrier. And that can be from an admitted or a non-admitted carrier. And that covers everything else. Liability, flood, a pipe that breaks, wind, other types of perils, as they would say. So a lot of the folks in the Palisades area had to carry a primary policy in order to get a mortgage, which consists of FAIR Plan policy and then a DIC policy. So the stories that we're hearing, of course, that some folks, all they had was FAIR Plan coverage. Perhaps maybe they did not have a mortgage. There's a lot of folks that live in the Palisades that had been there for decades, and maybe they didn't have a mortgage. So they had minimal coverage, maybe a FAIR Plan policy that covered $300,000, $600,000 worth of damage. So a lot of folks were underinsured. If all they counted on was being made whole by the FAIR Plan, they're out of luck. Folks that had full coverage fared better. But a lot of these homes in the Palisades are, $5-10 million properties, and it's very expensive to get insurance to compensate you for a total loss of that magnitude. And it's been my experience that most folks were underinsured, sadly to say. But no one was anticipating an event of this magnitude. Certainly public officials in Sacramento and certainly the insurance industry. So for the first time, I think since the 90s, the FAIR Plan has put an assessment, a special assessment on all of the admitted carriers in California to replenish the FAIR Plan fund so that they have funds to pay out these claims going forward. So a lot of dynamics in the insurance industry. I'm doing a number of insurance appraisals as well. And I did a lot of work after the Woolsey fire in Malibu, about 30 or 40 properties there. But the Woolsey fire was different because it didn't affect the entire community of Malibu, but swaths of it, yes. So it came through canyons and ridges and took out pockets of houses. About 17% of the housing inventory in Malibu was destroyed by the fire. But it wasn't just absolute total devastation of an entire community like we're seeing today. So this is pretty unprecedented. So that's the insurance story. As a gentleman that we had on our CRE podcast that took a deep dive into the insurance angle, we need to we need to figure this out. Public and private, the public officials and private industry need to figure this out so that we can make insurance available at a reasonable price. Otherwise, you can't get construction financing. You're not going to be able to get a loan to buy in these neighborhoods. These neighborhoods will clear out if we cannot solve the insurance issues. They will be solved because these neighborhoods are gorgeous. They're beautiful. I mean, we talk about the Paradise Fire that occurred in 2018. About 10,000 homes were destroyed there. They are slowly coming back. And the insurance issue there was really compounded the problem of rebuilding. That is a long playing issue there in Paradise. I think we'll see things, we'll see rebuilding, we'll see a reconstitution of these neighborhoods, I think, more quickly than Paradise in some of these remote outlying neighborhoods, just because of the brain trust, the availability of materials and labor coming in through the ports and through industry, through the urbanized manufacturing base of Los Angeles. We'll start to see the rebuilding effort take place, I think, more quickly than, say, in Paradise or in some of these other outlying communities. So insurance, it's a big canard right now.
Boy, there's just no way around that, I think, Charles. And one of the things that Mark and I have talked about a fair amount on is just how complex the markets are, and insurance is just one of many components, but in this case can certainly be a significant component of the value of property, of its utility. How much can somebody afford to pay if the insurance rate is at one price point versus 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 times that price point? It just impacts the market, price or market value at some level. And I think, to your point, I mean, it's a beautiful area. It will rebuild. The question is not so much, is it ever going to, rebuild and come back, but it's more, what's it going to cost to insure homes in this area, and what's the corresponding impact going to be? And we see similar, stories playing out in, coastal areas where flooding, where Mark talked about the hurricanes in Houston and the flooding that comes with that. I remember, I'm surrounded by a lot of national forest area and, little pockets of private land and development and homes, but not of the scale, of what you have down there in Southern California. But I remember doing an appraisal, 9 or 10 years ago, and there was a forest fire burning, and I was appraising this home halfway built, for construction financing, and literally standing there talking with the homeowners. Ash is like falling down around us, and then they're saying, I don't know if this thing's going to be here tomorrow or not, but they were hoping they had good enough construction insurance in place to cover the bases there. So this insurance topic in and of itself is interesting, but it also translates and kind of correlates into a broader topic of just the values in general. I'd love any commentary you've got, Charles, on what you've seen the impact being with these fires coming through on the market for lots in the Palisades and around, as well as homes that may have survived. I mean, you talked early on about before and after values, impact of diminution of value, from the fires. Any high-level observations you can share with us as far as what the fires have done in terms of values in these affected neighborhoods?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So my studies up until this point, I've segregated, my focus is in the Palisades area. It just happens to be where a lot of my casualty loss appraisal business is coming. I'm to a lesser extent Altadena, but Palisades has been my primary focus. So if we look at the tier 1 fire zones, that's where the destruction was, 80-90% of all the structures are gone. The Alphabet Streets in particular is a neighborhood just north of Sunset Boulevard where virtually everything was burnt. So what I'm finding is that for homes that survived in these neighborhoods, and there are a few, the post-fire value losses are anywhere from 15 to 25%, in some cases maybe a little bit more. That does not include homes that are damaged that have smoke damage, that have to be remediated before they can be occupied again. That's an additional contributing factor to the loss. And for vacant lots in the tier 1 fire zones, in other words, all of those homes, all the lots that are hitting the market now, we're seeing a pre to post fire spread of about 23 to 32%. That's been my the research that I've done has indicated about that, and that's supported by studies that have been done in the Paradise area, the Cedar Fire in San Diego, Malibu Fire, the Woolsey Fire in 2018, and other fire events. Interestingly enough, if you look out into tier 2 and then adjacent communities, we're actually seeing an increase in property values. For example, in Brentwood, which is adjacent to the Riviera neighborhood of the Palisades, the Riviera was touched by fire, but there wasn't this wholesale destruction that we saw in the Alphabet Streets. Brentwood is seeing a 10 to 15% increase overall. Santa Monica, which is just southeast of the Palisades area, is seeing about a 12 to 15% increase for single-family residences. And that's because of a demand surge from folks that have been displaced. They have to go somewhere. So we've got folks that are coming down to the South Bay, Manhattan Beach, Redondo Beach, Hermosa Beach, even the Palos Verdes neighborhood, Orange County, Newport Beach, Newport Coast, or they're going to the Valley, Calabasas, Westlake Village, Encino, some of those neighborhoods. So people they're moving out to outlying communities that are still relatively close to job centers, employment centers, and they're getting along with their lives. Some folks have actually taken their insurance proceeds and purchased properties. A lot of folks are renting. So the rental surge, it's another metric that I analyzed. In the affected areas, we've seen a bump of anywhere from 15 to 20% in the fair market rental value of homes that survived. So those some numbers. Interesting. My mom, my mother grew up in Woodland Hills in Canoga Park, which is west part of the San Fernando Valley. And she remembers referring to Malibu as, oh, that's the place that burns all the time. Because I mean, there were 13 fires in Malibu of at least 10,000 acres between 1930 and 1996. So, fire is just as much part of the legacy as, the sagebrush and the chaparral that become the nutrients for the soil that spurns the growth of the next, all of this growth. It's just this cycle. It's nature's cycle, and that's how it works there. In any event, those are some numbers. I'm using those numbers with doing paired sales. I'm doing appraisals of homes that have survived pre-fire. What's the pre-fire value? What's the post-fire value? And using those metrics to apply to some of these cases that I'm involved with right now. Last thing I'll leave you with, I'm doing some condominium sites, which is interesting. And a lot of multifamily properties, especially near Pali High and Sunset Boulevard, were just destroyed. Condominiums, apartment buildings. I've got one case. We did a 4-unit condominium building where everything was destroyed, and the HOA wanted to know what was the value of the land. So that was an interesting exercise. And I'm working on another case involving a 6-unit condominium project where the whole project is gone. They want to know what the value of the land is so they can decide what's our course of action. Do we rebuild or do we just sell to a developer and move on? So a lot of interesting cases there. And anyway, didn't want to get into the weeds too far on that, but those are some metrics that I think are pretty universal and have been studied and extracted from other major fire events in California.
Well, it's fascinating to hear what the impact is, Charles. And one of the things I hadn't maybe really thought about, but definitely makes a lot of sense as you explain it, is not only the diminution of value of properties affected directly by the fire, but these outlying communities where the demand surges because you have a displaced population base. And as you were talking, I was going to ask, well, is that because the people had to move somewhere else? And you answered the question, before I even needed to ask it.
Absolutely.
But, so there's kind of this dual impact of obviously a decline in values, on properties affected by the fire, but then an increase in values. And as you talk about those percentages, that's since beginning of the year. I mean, so that's a notable shift in values in a relatively short period of time, just as a result of these fires, coming through and what impact it has on the displaced population as well. So, really, really fascinating perspective.
Yeah. And for, valuation practitioners anywhere, the factors that we look at are neighborhood disamenity. And think about that term. We talk about amenities. What are amenities? So shopping, schools, libraries, social infrastructure. But when all of that is taken away, it's what's called neighborhood disamenity. All of those things are now gone. It's going to take time to reconstitute those things. Market stigma is another factor. As buyers and lenders, they believe that there is a risk of future fires. There's insurance hurdles, construction inconvenience. That's another fact. Environmental stigma. We're dealing with that with the phase 1 and phase 2 recovery in the fire zones. And that can, the environmental stigma can turn into a psychological stigma in the long term. So we're going to have buyers that may still be concerned 3, 4, 5 years from now if they want to buy a property in a fire zone. Has the soil been remediated? Has all the toxins been extracted out of the soil? Safety, security concerns, reduced demand, and there's all of these different external factors that go into that diminution of value calculation that I spoke of earlier.
It's just fascinating how that all works and comes together. And I think one of the things that you just kind of naturally touched on is as part of describing it, but that a lot of times, people who don't dive as deeply into this as valuation practitioners, there's this general question of, well, okay, so what's the impact of value, from a fire, from a flood, from a whatever. Right. And what, as you get into it, you realize there's not just a single right answer to that question. And part of the answer to that is a framing of, well, what area are you talking about? And so you were defining it as tier 1 versus tier 2 versus tier 3 impacts of the fire. And it's kind of a gradient as to, how much was burnt, what's left, was it just the isolated property, or was it all of the amenities, pertinent to that in the community? There's just a lot that goes into it. And I find that, even, agents and potential buyers and sellers assume that there's kind of a more simplistic answer to a lot of these valuation questions than ultimately there are. What the challenge is for the appraiser is to articulate well, what all of those factors are in a way that, that makes sense, because there's just a lot that pertain to an impact on the value of a property.
Exactly. Yeah. And we got to do our job properly. I mean, we're licensed professionals, and a lot of the casualty loss work is going to be for IRS and franchise tax board purposes in California. So my sense is that they're going to be diluted with these casualty loss appraisals as part of their tax filings coming up. The tax deadline being October 15th of this year. It was delayed from April to October. So they're going to have a lot of these reports coming in. So I just got to make sure we dot our I's, cross our T's, that we're in compliance with the USPAP, and that we provide a well-supported conclusion of value. That's what we do.
Yeah, Charles, I'm sure Dr. Randy Bell. I've been in a seminar or two of his, and he was famously on the cover of Rolling Stone, maybe the only appraiser, got to be the only appraiser, right? But had appraised a lot of
for you, Mark.
Well, yeah. But appraised a lot of properties with, infamous properties with stigma, murder houses or that sort of thing. But was saying, at the end of the day, on the macro, 20% is about where we end up coming with a lot of these things. Now, more specific numbers are required for a lot of the work that we do as appraisers. But even listening to your numbers in a lot of ways, Charles, it is in and around that 20%. I saw this in our Hurricane Harvey. We had 3 or 4 floods, like bam, 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 all in a row. And looking at the Katrina stuff in New Orleans, all sorts of different data points that point to about the same thing. I wondered with these homes on the market, in these lots that are on the market. So we've talked about the value effects. Are they moving? Are these homes that are in lots that get on the market here with all the different externalities that you're analyzing? Are we seeing them transact?
Yeah. So a few more numbers here. As of I think June, there's about a 12-month supply of lots in the Palisades on the market, 173 active listings, 13 under contract, 12 pending, and 43 have sold. So the properties that have sold, it's interesting. I actually did a deep dive into who's buying these lots. About half of these are entities, LLCs, developers, and the intention would be to come in. Maybe some of them are just land banking their money. They're just getting their money in when the market's hurting. And they believe that if they hold that lot for a long period of time, that they'll make a nice return on their investment. I'm sure that's going on. There's probably going to be some assemblage. I saw 2 lots side by side bought by the same developer. Perhaps they're going to assemble those 2 and build a much larger house. So there's different trends taking place there. But when you think about the number of properties that are on the market to sell, what does that mean? That means those people are out. They are leaving the Palisades. On a percentage basis, it's still very small. When you think about 6,300 homes destroyed, and there's 170 to 200 lots for sale, that gives me hope that, for the most part, people are going to stick it out, and that's good. That's good. Altadena is a slightly different story. The price points there are much lower. The average lot in the Palisades is 1.3, 1.5 million. The average lot in Altadena is about 700,000. We're seeing the market moving a little bit faster in Altadena, and the inventory is about 3 to 4 months supply right now of vacant lots. So it's interesting to compare and contrast the two markets.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. Well, I wonder, with you spending so much time in this market and analyzing this, I'd kind of give you the floor. What are some areas of interest that Jeff and I have not thought of here to kind of dive into? What would be good for us to know about the real estate situation as it relates there in California?
Well, specifically about the fires, I covered the stats. The human side of this is, as valuation professionals, or if you're a broker, if you're a contractor, if you've been hired to assist with cleanup, it's a very emotional time for folks. And we have to approach the victims of the fire gingerly and with some deference. And just, I've spent hours and hours and hours on the phone with folks who are just have questions. What do I do? How can you help me out here? And I just walk them through what they need the documents they need to gather, the different trades maybe that they need to engage, how to deal with the insurance company, the casualty loss question. Not in an attempt to sell my services, but just to offer some guidance and help. And whoever they choose to use as their valuation professional is fine. But it's helpful for them just to give them some information. So, I feel good about that. And we have to approach these people with just some love and caring and just extend a hand. I've been blessed in this industry. I want to give back. I want to help as many people as I can. And, in my small little corner of the world, I feel like I'm making a difference.
Charles, I think something that isn't thought of often with appraisers is that we enter into people's lives for a very, very short period of time, but usually it is a large life event involved. Our presence is involved around a large event. Sometimes they're very happy events, but often they are not. Whether it is a casualty loss like you're describing here, don't know what to do next. The same right. Sentiment in divorce, Charles.
Divorce, litigation. It's so many different. I've got so many different cases. I've got about 25 cases on my desk right now, and they range from all kinds of issues. I got one case that's interesting. We have a registered sex offender in a cul-de-sac across the street from a home where there's kids. They bought the house, and the sex offender was not disclosed to them. Partly their fault. I mean, the Megan's Law database is available, so they, that part of the case probably will not bear fruit for them. But it's an issue. There's definitely a diminution of value factor there. If you've got this old man who was a registered sex offender cavorting about his front yard, God, I just can't imagine. A lot of divorce cases where there's some contention between the parties, estate and trust planning, date of death work. In each of these cases, there's an emotional component involved in the assignment. So I just try to be kind, to all parties involved. And I think the trier of fact in these cases, whether it's a judge or a jury, they appreciate it. And it's my hope that justice is served. That's the bottom line.
Well, Charles, I think you are a wonderful example of what an SRA and a residential appraiser at the top of their game can be. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing some of your insights and observations about life and real estate there in California. We hope to have you back sometime if you'll allow it.
Absolutely, it's been a real pleasure. And I enjoy your podcast. I've watched other episodes of it, and I just appreciate the platform to express my thoughts. Thank you so much.
You bet.
You're a wonderful guest and a wealth of knowledge, Charles. So we'll definitely stay in touch as we move forward. But just wanted to also express appreciation. It's one thing to hear, the headlines, to see a news story that's happening to someone somewhere, but to have a first-hand view of it and be involved in kind of the aftermath of seeing the pieces come back together. It's just a perspective that we really thought would resonate. Like Mark said, there are other areas of the country that have other types of natural disasters, but boy, it sure is a visceral response when you're seeing it firsthand and living it versus, just some news story somewhere, some other part of the country. So again, just a big thank you for your perspective on, what's going on, not just at the time, but in the aftermath as well.
Thank you.
All righty. Till next time. Talk to you soon.
Jeff. Mark, appreciate it.
Thanks, Charles.
Take care.